Rome does not negotiate with armed enemies. That was the position of Aurunculeius Cotta when Ambiorix, the leader of the Eburones, tricked Titurius Sabinus into the ambush which saw their 15 cohorts slaughtered. Rome does not negotiate with armed enemies was also the stance taken by Quintus Cicero, when Ambiorix, attempting to repeat the same trick, laid siege to his camp. Having taken Roman prisoners, and learning their methods of siege, it was not long before the Gauls built siege towers and other weapons of their own, which they employed to keep Quintus Cicero and his cohorts locked inside their camp, cut off from the rest of the world. For more than a week, Quintus Cicero's men defended their camp from the ruthless attacks led by Ambiorix. At night, rather than sleeping, many of his men, himself included, spent the passing hours repairing the damaged fortifications in anticipation of the next day's coming attack. After a week, a cavalry rider, dressed in Gallic clothing, successfully slipped through the siege, and made haste for Caesar. For a second week, Quintus Cicero repelled daily attacks on his camp, the numbers of dead and injured mounting with each passing day. About a week after the disguised rider slipped past the Gallic siege, one of Quintus Cicero's patrols noticed a spear stuck on the inside of the fortifications. Upon retrieving the spear, they noticed a note was attached, written in Greek, promising, "Caesar is on his way." And Caesar was on his way, leaving fields and villages burning in his wake. When the sky, visible from Quintus Cicero's camp, glowed in a swirling mass of orange and black, from the burning village below, Ambiorix pulled his army from the siege, and marched to confront Caesar's forces. Taking the high ground, the Gallic army made camp, and awaited Caesar's approach. Caesar, having only those legions he could muster from Gallia Narbonensis, had to be cautious. Ambiorix's army greatly outnumbered his, and attempting to attack uphill would be a suicide mission. After making camp, Caesar sent out his cavalry to try and tempt Ambiorix from his hill. Ambiorix responded with cavalry to match, but held his position. This gave Caesar an idea. Ambiorix had tricked Titurius Sabinus into leaving the safety of the camp. Since Ambiorix liked tricks, Caesar had one for him. The following day, Caesar ordered his cavalry to harass Ambiorix's army, and immediately retreat when Ambiorix's cavalry charged, so as to lure them close to camp. Caesar commanded his men on the walls to abandon their posts as soon as the Gallic cavalry was close enough to see them. When the Gallic cavalry saw Caesar's men fleeing, and jumping from their posts, they returned to Ambiorix and reported that Caesar's men were too fearful to fight, anticipating that Caesar would soon withdraw from the field. To ensure Caesar did not escape, Ambiorix advanced with his whole army, and surrounded his camp. As Ambiorix haughtily issued the ultimatum for Caesar's surrender, the portcullises on all four walls opened simultaneously, and Caesar's legions poured out, weapons swinging. Caesar's legions did not fight in an offensive line, nor form a defensive position. They fought, unstructured, in a disarrayed free-for-all, which took the Gauls by surprise. As Caesar's men ruthlessly slaughtered every Gaul within reach, Ambiorix, and the rest of his army fled the field. As Ambiorix planned his attacks, first against Sabinus, then against Quintus Cicero, another Gallic ally named Indutiomarus, who was leader of the Treveri tribe, laid siege to Titus Labienus near the Ardennes mountain range. Indutiomarus had first attempted to unify a force of Gallic tribes before Caesar's invasion of Britain. However, when Caesar marched through his territory after crossing the Rhine River, most of Indutiomarus's allies lost their nerve, and deserted. This forced the Treveri tribal leader to submit to Caesar in order to maintain his position, which was now at Caesar's volition. However, in addition to taking over 200 Treveri hostages, many of whom were family members of Indutiomarus, Caesar also placed a man of his own, named Cingetorix, into power, to counter the influence of Indutiomarus. Because Caesar had raised up a rival for control of the Treveri tribe, the embittered Indutiomarus was quick to join with Ambiorix and Catuvolcus in their pre-arranged attack against Caesar's forces. By attacking Titus Labienus, Indutiomarus prevented the legate from joining his forces to those of Caesar. Unfortunately, like Quintus Cicero and Aurunculeius, who would not negotiate with armed enemies, Titus Labienus could not be lured out of his camp. And so, upon receiving the news that Caesar had defeated Ambiorix's forces, Indutiomarus withdrew, and along with his men, disappeared into the Ardennes mountains. Ambiorix and Catuvolcus escaped Caesar's victory, fleeing back to the lands of the Eburones. Expecting Caesar's quick vengeance, Ambiorix and Catuvolcus made every effort to evacuate their non-combat citizens, while preparing the rest of the Eburones to defend their tribal lands. But Caesar did not immediately march against the Eburones. Titurius Sabinus, who had, only the year before, successfully defeated Gallic tribes during the Venetiae revolt, had failed to imagine a scenario where the Gauls might lead him into a trap. For his recklessness, Caesar was down 15 cohorts, which equaled approximately a legion and a half. Quintus Cicero, who had preserved his camp, as a good commander should, had endured such heavy casualties, that by the time Caesar marched to relieve him, he had suffered the loss of almost 90% of his forces. Before Caesar could think about revenge, he needed to strengthen his depleted legions. Caesar wrote to Pompeius Magnus in Rome. Unfortunately, since the death of Caesar's daughter, Pompeius was no longer Caesar's son-in-law. But Caesar needed legions from Pompeius to help him maintain control of Gaul. It may be at this time that Caesar offered his 16-year-old grandniece to Pompeius as a bride, hoping to keep Pompeius tied to him. It is unclear how many letters were exchanged between Caesar and Pompeius, and between Caesar and his niece, but the historians tell us that Octavia and her husband, Gaius Claudius Marcellus, refused to divorce. Because they were not willing to divorce, Pompeius Magnus declined the marriage offer. He did, however, agree to lend Caesar 2 of his legions that were stationed in Hispania. Additionally, Caesar levied another legion's worth of men from Cisalpine Gaul, bringing his total number of legions up to 10, or approximately 50,000 infantry. Rather than returning to one of his provinces, to oversee his proconsular administrative duties during the 54–53 BC winter, Caesar chose to remain in Gaul. Ambiorix's rebellion had humiliated Caesar in the eyes of the Roman Senate by demonstrating that Gaul was not as pacified as Caesar had indicated. So outraged was Caesar that he vowed to the Senate he would destroy all of Gaul's Belgic tribes. And so, before the weather had even warmed in 53 BC, Caesar was on his way. With legions behind him, he began a brutal and violent assault against the Belgae tribes. Beginning with the Nervii, who had assisted the Eburones in their siege against Quintus Cicero, Caesar stole their livestock, burned their fields, raided their villages, and took many prisoners. To save their people, the Nervii quickly surrendered. And when the warm weather intensified in the spring of 53 BC, so did Caesar's onslaught, as he likewise terrorized the ancient Senones tribe within Belgic territory, until they, too, surrendered. Next, Caesar marched into the lands of the Menapii and Morini tribes, and allowed his men to burn their fields, steal their livestock, plunder their villages and ravage their women. Like the other Belgic tribes, the Menapii and Morini quickly surrendered to Caesar. When Caesar marched into Ambiorix's tribe, his rage was at its peak. Following Caesar's genocidal burning of fields, destruction of towns, and slaying of citizens, including women and children, the Eburones tribe completely disappeared from the historical record. Against the Eburones, Caesar carried out his own, personal, holocaust. After laying waste to the Eburones, Caesar turned to the Germans. Ambiorix had claimed support from the German Suebi tribe. And Indutiomarus had allied with tribes across the Rhine. And so, once again, Caesar built a bridge across the Rhine River, and led his troops into Germanic territory, in order to punish them for daring to defy him. And once again, the Germanic tribes retreated deeper into the forests, leaving Caesar nothing but empty villages to burn. When Caesar's supplies ran low, he returned to Gaul, and destroyed his bridge. By the end of the 53 BC campaigning season, a campaigning season which had seen him devolve from brilliant battle strategist, to vicious executioner, and architect of widespread terror, Caesar had finally exacted his revenge. To deter the Gauls from attempting another revolt during the 53–52 BC winter, Caesar housed 6 of his 10 legions in Belgic territory. But Caesar's brutality had only shown the Gauls the necessity of greater caution, better strategies, and the utmost secrecy. Gaul's resolve to be rid of Caesar, however, remained undiminished.